Hey guys, what's up? It's Public back with another video, and we're kind of kicking off another feedback video today. And today we're going to be going over our talents. All right, let's get started. Okay, so we just did another video talking about covenants and all the changes we've made there. I do kind of want to shift a little bit to the talent conversation. I brought up talents and the problems with them, the balancing with them several times on this channel, but we're going to go through this again. I made a giant forum post with all these feedback points as well. This is just kind of me talking about them. So please give a like on that post if you agree with what I'm saying. But without further ado, let's get started here with the level 15 row. So first things first, I think this row is okay. I think the problem primarily is a balancing one. So between Fortress of the Mind, clear that single target choice, Death and Madness, great with ads or things you can snipe like Mythic Plus. And then Furling Darkness is kind of that AoE cleave option, really pairs well with Misery. Right now, we're kind of suffering a problem with Insanity Starvation and lack of real, bump in Mind Blast damage. And because of that, Fortress of the Mind is actually looking very, very strong here, insofar as that the Sims are actually saying to take this almost all the time for all reasons. I don't think it's quite healthy. I don't think it's that necessarily Fortress needs buffed. I think it's just the fact that, this is kind of screaming that, hey, the actual Insane Generation bump that we're getting here, remember, it is 20% more insanity on Mindflay and Mind Blast, which is very significant, especially from Mindflay's perspective. It's saying that we like insanity, and we're not getting that much elsewhere right now. So I don't know if Fortress needs to get nerfed, or they just need to continue buffing Mind Blast and Mindflay. That way we have a better baseline amount of insanity generation, and we're not hitting that starvation point, but we'll kind of see what happens. Because I do think that the Madness is a great option for Mythic Plus, and Unfurling can be good. I think the problem I see with Unfurling Darkness more than anything, it doesn't scale super well with anything. It's kind of just always going to be that flat damage you're just getting every now and then. I don't know. It's okay. I think it is kind of awkward to play with as well, but it's not bad. I think they could do a little bit more there, but it's kind of how we're looking now. It's fine. It's fine. Moving on now to the level, I'm going to skip the 25 row because I don't really have much to say about that. It's fine. It's not my favorite, but it's fine. Now, level 30 row, this is where things get a little interesting. I think this is probably one of the better talent rows that we have in the game, just because, Twist of Fate, clearly the single target choice, or kind of, I guess not clearly the single target choice. It can be good if you have kind of ads sporadically coming out to proc this throughout a fight. Misery also looks really, really strong in that kind of cleave situation, especially when things are spread target cleave. And then Searing Nightmare is that AoE, especially stacked AoE option that we have there. Searing Nightmare is kind of awkward to play with, and that's kind of all I'll leave it at with that. I mean, a lot of folks are kind of bringing up the problems with trying to cast it in Mindseer is kind of weird. I brought that up in my initial kind of review video from beta. We'll see if they change anything here to make it more usable, but for right now, it does do a crap ton of damage, so there is that. Now, Misery versus Twist of Fate, this is where things get kind of weird in that because, based on how much we're refreshing our dots, Misery continues to get more value, especially in single target. And this is kind of where the danger, I guess, starts to come in that we've started to see Misery start overtaking Twist of Fate, depending on what talents you're taking. Because of that, I'm refreshing dots more often, so doing that with Misery feels really, really strong. Again, you take Unfurling Darkness here, you're getting that extra damage out as well. So we're seeing a direct correlation to effectively how many Void Bolts are you getting out in the fight, how much are you prioritizing those Void Bolts, and how often do you have to then redot your targets. And specifically with Hungering Void and Dissonant Echoes, the balancing here is very, very delicate. So right now, because we're kind of leaning towards using Hungering Void all of the time, and because, Dissonant Echoes as a conduit is being very, very good, and especially single target, multi-target meh, is kind of pushing Misery out of the way a little bit and saying, oh, hey, we actually don't need to refresh dots as often because we're getting more Void Bolts out, so let's just use Twist of Fate instead. And I think that's a little unhealthy of a balancing here. So I don't know, it is kind of interesting to bring up that, as we get more gear, we get more Void Bolts out, and then Twist of Fate starts rising in power. So I don't know, it's kind of interesting. I know a lot of people like having Misery as an option there in single target just because it's, easier to play with, but the balance is kind of shifting all over the place right now. So we'll see where, honestly, the big question here is the balance of our level 50 talents. Right now it's kind of Hungering Void all the time, and it's really throwing this balance out of whack, but we'll see what happens. Moving on to the level 35 row, I did a big section on this in the forum post that I did here. I think a lot of things can be done to improve our utility from this row. Specifically, I'd like Last Word to get reworked to be a 24-second flat interrupt without a silence to kind of further help balance it. I'd like to have a normal ranged interrupt here, especially one that maybe has a full range, not a 30-yard range, but we'll see. I would love that change. I'd also love them to revert the Mind Bomb change they made before, make Mind Bomb stun again. I really loved having an AoE stun. I really want that back. It was so great to play with in Mythic Plus. I don't know if they did make Mind Bomb and AoE stun, if Psychic Horror still has a place in the game, or if that makes sense to then rework that as well. But, you know, I don't know. I'm kind of curious with your thoughts, guys, on that. If Mind Bomb did stun again, does it still make sense to have Psychic Horror, or should we put something else in its place instead? Are the PvPers going to hate me for saying that? I mean, who knows? That's just kind of how I feel right now. And then moving on to the level 40 row here. So I already mentioned this before in my other video, but Auspicious Spirits and Psychic Link are kind of having a little bit of an identity crisis that Blizzard's trying to address, in that both talents are kind of specializing in that kind of spread target damage as long as you have Vampiric Touch active, which is so similar to both the talents that it's going to be a very much a balancing kind of nightmare for Blizzard of like, hey, you know, you're basically either going to take Auspicious Spirits all the time or Psychic Link all the time. Well, AS is much easier to play with and it works in a variety of situations. Psychic Link is a bit more specialized, and unfortunately, Mind Blast damage is not that good, as I've iterated on a few times now. And it's still, Psychic Link is still kind of suffering from this problem. Auspicious Spirits is basically surpassing it in all cases right now, which means probably not what Blizzard intended. Even if you're using the Talbadar's Legendary, it's still enough to bring it over that gap. So we're missing something here. I don't know if it's buffing Mind Blast damage or continuing to buff Psychic Link or Talbadar's, but that Mind Blast build just still doesn't make sense. AS is still that consistent way to go. Psychic Link is just kind of weird to play with, especially with Talbadar's. It's just not working out very well for it right now. Last but not least, Shadow Crash is a absolute nightmare. They did at least revert the problem where before it had a minimum range of like I think 20 at one point, or now 10 yards. It now is back to what it was before, so it's a 0 to 40 yard projectile that you get 3 charges of, which is kind of interesting to think about, but in reality, it doesn't feel great to play with. The actual travel time of Shadow Crash changes based on where you are placing it. So if you do it at like max range, you're looking at like a 4 or 5 second duration for it to fly to that location. Whereas if it's right on top of your character, it's instant cast. This is kind of weird because before it did have like a fixed travel time, which they've now removed either accidentally or on purpose. Just makes it terrible to time or to like plan where it's going to land on anything other than a target dummy. So that just feels terrible to play with. And again, it just doesn't do enough damage to consider warranting at any point in time right now. So I don't know. It's definitely kind of weird because we have 2 AoE spread cleave abilities. One that's kind of favoring Insanity, the one's supposed to favor damage. Shadow Crash should really be a single target option. That's kind of what we're missing in that row. And unfortunately, it's just not working out to be that good right now. So, is what it is. All right, moving on to the level 45 row. This has actually seen some significant changes recently. They've actually done a couple things here, because we used to be taking Mindbender all the time. Well, they actually nerfed Mindbender's Insanity slightly, which did hurt it quite a lot. And they also did buff, or I guess fix Shadow Fiend back to being a 15-second duration, which basically has kind of brought Void Torrent back into the fold. Void Torrent is now our best in slot talent basically all the time. For better or for worse, right? I think Void Torrent is a very cool spell. It's fun to press. It looks awesome. It is a little weird to use in the rotation because of the way we're kind of overflowed with stuff inside of Void Form. This is a only use outside of Void Form button, which I think is fine. It does break up that rotation a bit when you're not in your kind of cooldown mode. So I think that's fine. Although I kind of only expected it to win only in single target, but as it stands right now, it's doing enough damage. Shadow Fiend is okay. It does sync up better with Void Form to where Mindbender is pretty much only the dungeon choice, and especially the dungeon choice if you're using Shadow Flame Prism, which honestly is fine. I've never been a big fan of Mindbender as a button, especially Shadow Fiend as a button. Shadow Flame does make that interaction better, but kind of baseline, that's kind of where we're thinking right now. I don't know, guys. I at this point, I think I'd rather them just delete Mindbender or just make it baseline and put something else here instead. The option kind of feels wasted because both Mindbender and Void Torrent are single target spells, assuming no legendary. And so effectively, and they both generate some amount of insanity. They're both a very kind of relatively short cooldown, a minute versus 45 seconds, depending on what you're taking, your covenant abilities, all that good stuff. And I think because they're so similar, it's suffering from the same problem as AS and Psychic Link, in that one of them is just going to do more damage or give us enough insanity or more insanity. We're just going to use that then all the time. Mindbender does have a little bit of an unfair advantage in that it does scale disproportionately with a Conduit and a Legendary. So I don't know. I think because of that, it doesn't make sense to have both of them on the same talent row or just both of them in general. So that's kind of where we're at right now. As far as Damnation is concerned, I don't really have too much to say there. I know the PvPers love this spell. I think it's also great for an open world ability. So I think that's fine to have some talents that are kind of, not really used in a raiding a dungeon environment, but do have other use cases out there. I'm not that naive, but I don't know. It's not a PvE talent, Damnation. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. But who knows? Maybe there's a fight that will be able to abuse that burst damage more. Okay, and then guys, last but not least from this video is our lovely level 50 talent row. This is kind of where some problems have started to develop, primarily because of Hungering Void. So Hungering Void is the newest talent that we've gotten added. I actually think this talent is very well designed. I think it's a very interesting talent to play around. It is a passive. It could be a little bit better, but honestly, the idea of like kind of extending Void form is very interesting. I think it's very cool, and it's also very powerful. And getting that extra kind of damage taken effect on a single target for priority damage is great from a Shadow Priest, because that's where we like to do our damage. It's a very good niche for us, and I think that's very positive. The problem is it's really exposing that Ancient Madness and Surrender to Madness aren't as good as talents. Looking at just like a pure single target fight, Hungering Void is sitting right comfortably at this kind of 5% mark of its value in our damage, whereas Ancient Madness is lagging behind at like 3%, and then Surrender Madness is only 1.5% on pure single target, which makes perfect sense, right? You're only getting one use of Surrender to Madness. It's not really a single target button, but the fact that it's just half as good as Ancient Madness kind of shows how bad Ancient Madness is relative to the other two options. And that's kind of leading to some problems. So I really think they need to do a good look at Ancient Madness, maybe rework it slightly, because it is just decaying crit in Void form. But by the time you're in Void form, you've casted like 1 or 2 Devouring Plagues. You've already cut your crit in half and you're at 15%, right? And that just doesn't feel super great. And it's really hurting this talent from an overall perspective. So they probably need to either slow the ramping down of the crit or even make the crit higher or stop at some point. Because it's just not lasting the full Void form. It's not doing a lot of damage. So I think if they get that right, it'll be okay. Surrender to Madness, I think, is going to be okay. It might skirt past the balancing a little bit. It's going to be a great Mythic Plus talent, I think. You're not seeing a lot of it getting used right now in pre-patch just because of how powerful Spiteful Apparitions are. But I think inside of the beta environment, Surrender will continue to thrive inside of Mythic Plus. Although they could consider giving it 1 or 2 extra things to make it the kind of clear choice if you can use it. Because right now it is not necessarily the clear choice based on how our abilities scale and that kind of thing. So we'll see what happens, but that is the level 50 row as it stands right now. So again, kind of a rocky place. There are, like, if they just do like a small tweak to a few of these rows, we are basically perfect. This is so close to being good. I just want to make sure we get this feedback out there as soon as possible. All right, guys. So that is it for this video. Thank you so much to the Patreons that are supporting me and all the content that I'm making. Thank you so much, guys. And again, if you agree with anything I'm saying here, please leave a like on the forum post I'm going to put in the description of the video. Just get as much attention on this as possible. And again, thank you guys so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one.